everyone, and welcome back to another FME Fireside with the DE team here at Abley. We've got a small change up with the lineup today. We're going back to the beginning. So we've got Gav, Todd, and myself, Hamish. And today we're going to have a bit of a chat around business systems integrations and how we've utilised FME, which is often seen as a spatial tool, to actually integrate with business systems, which, while we do still some spatial data in them, actually inherently empower and enable the business to perform its required tasks. So I'm going to go straight to you, Gav, and talk about some of the work you've done with Hubspot, which is a CRM, a customer relationship management tool, and a piece of software that we use for sort of timesheeting and invoice called WorkflowMax.
Yeah, thanks, Hamish. So Hubspot, as some of you know, and some of you may not know, is a customer resource management tool. It also does sales, it does website creation, it does a lot of things. It's pretty nice when it comes to, functionality, getting started, low barrier of entry for a lot of people to be able to get into that sales and marketing side. And so WorkflowMax is a Kiwi project management system, more or less.
It's based off of Xero,
Right.
which some
So
sort
like
of
MYOB or QuickBooks or
Yeah.
Xero is quite a decent size company across the world.
Right. So that's kind of giving you an idea of these two systems, and both of them we were interacting through the API for both systems. The requirements at the outset were to connect these two systems so that HubSpot could be where we create our leads, or deals as they're called in HubSpot speak, and they would move through a pipeline, I guess you could say, from here's an initial prospect all the way through to the sale and into project closeout and those types of things. And there were 8 different steps that they could move through, and the job was to connect, as the deal was moving through those pipelines, connect it with WorkflowMax to kick off a project, and more or less replacing a lot of the manual effort that goes into the WorkflowMax bit, where you're creating the project, creating project folders, assigning people, assigning budgets, and all kinds of things. And so initially I was pretty excited, fun project, dealing with APIs, you're dealing with something new. And it was a lot of, hey, I'm going to build this, so when a deal gets to this stage, I'm going to create a project in WorkflowMax. So how's this going to work in the APIs, and what are the different calls like? As you're working through, HubSpot was updating to new versions of their API, so then you have to deal with, I'm hitting a new URL or a different URL for different just pieces of the API.
And I think, one of the things, I think the WorkflowMax is a SOAP or XML based API.
Yeah, it's XML.
And HubSpot is a REST API. So again, then you're having to convert between those sort of two standards.
Right. And the WorkflowMax that we were using, the API is version 1, whereas they had newer versions available, but our system stayed on version 1 the whole time. So that made it easier, to be honest. It was just kind of sitting there, and I never had to worry about hitting the latest API URL or anything like that. And so moving forward, I'm just going to say that I learned a lot from this, as in the requirements at the outset were pretty small, and they grew and grew and grew as more of, you can do that, came up.
As the business realised, hey, FME can actually do all of this and automate all of these
and what
functionalities.
APIs allow you to do, and just the ability to take away a lot of that manual work.
Right.
So
for example, as the job got to a certain stage, we'd create the project in WorkflowMax, but at what point do we then make the source of truth WorkflowMax, and then data from that feeds back into HubSpot? So there was a certain point that we decided, okay, once a deal becomes operative, or the job becomes operative, anything that changes in WorkflowMax then needs to get fed back into HubSpot, just for record-keeping purposes. If budgets, if the project continues to grow and grow, different people. So one of the really cool things on both APIs is you can have individuals. And so as a project has staff assigned to it in WorkflowMax, I feed that back into HubSpot. And the reason I would do that is because if 3 years down the line, a job manager leaves the company, but they go back to a job and they need to know, oh, who else worked on this? Or if someone in the sales side is just wondering who else was on this job, they can then pull that information from HubSpot just as well as WorkflowMax. It was just kind of a neat little
So you basically set up a tool
bi-directional.
that, yeah, keeps them bi-directional, so it keeps them almost in sync, but they're not they're not the same, they're not showing the same information, but they have shared properties, shared information that needs to be consistent.
Yep. And so as I mentioned, the project and requirements grew and grew and grew, and one of the things that I did not do that I learned I should have done was create custom transformers for the different calls that were going to need to be made. If we're going to need to pull job manager, just make a call to the job managers, or make a call to certain deal pipeline where they are, so I know that if a job is considered a prospect, it's going to get this call. If it's considered operative, it's going to get this call. So that was with the biggest learnings, which we can move on to what Todd's doing, because he's now implementing his version of this with some of the same concepts that I had to go through.
Yes.
So jump through to this year, and earlier in the year, Xero sent out an email to all its WorkflowMax customers saying basically that WorkflowMax is at the end of life. They're not going to keep upgrading it. They were going to basically pass off the business onto a different company who are going to rebuild the platform, etc. So as part of unexpected, but one of the things that we started to do as an organisation was start looking at different vendors that existed, just to see, we started out with WorkflowMax when we were a company of just a few people, and we're nearly 100. So what's the platform that suits us best? And we found a platform that we think suits us best. It's called ProjectWorks, and so it's got an integration with HubSpot, but the integration is quite basic for the things that we do.
Yeah.
So back on to APIs and API calls now between HubSpot and ProjectWorks. So basically, taking the learnings of what we'd done previously, it was let's build custom transformers that we can interact with ProjectWorks with. It's also a slightly more complex system than WorkflowMax. There's a lot more interactions. I think I've got about 30 something different reference tables that they use. And so we're doing a whole bunch of checking and a whole bunch of options on every different type of call we do. So for instance, we don't have just a ability to create a project. We've got a single transformer such as projects, which will get all the projects or get a single project based on input, be able to update a project or be able to create a project. So building those all into basically the standard configuration that we've used for each of the different tasks that we need to perform, and build those into a custom transformer so that we can just reuse over and over again. And just as Gavin talked about, requirements.
Yep.
So the requirements, even in the last couple of months of learning this new system, have expanded. Look on, we might need to do this slightly differently to how we've done in the past.
And just going back on that, I think probably one of the challenges when you were doing your integration with WorkflowMax, Gavin, was the business might not have fully understood exactly what FME was able to do.
There's that, yes, you're right. They didn't know exactly what FME would be able to do, but HubSpot was new.
Yes,
and so we didn't know much about how we were going to be using HubSpot within the business. And I would imagine that we're in a situation now where we are going to use ProjectWorks very similarly to how we use WorkflowMax, but we don't know what all is in that software. And so in a year's time, HubSpot might sit here, ProjectWorks might sit here, some other new business system is now coming on board. Right, so there's going to be other things introduced in the future. And now we have a little bit more flexibility, quite a bit more flexibility with some of those custom transformers that integrate just with ProjectWorks, and then we can do the same for the other systems as we.
So it'll just continue to advance. But so that probably brings up to the next point of how FME is actually supporting us do some of this now and some of the advancements in 2023. So Swagger APIs are pretty common. ProjectWorks is a Swagger API. And you might have heard that FME now allows you to load up OpenAPI into HTTP callers. Well, OpenAPI is not a Swagger API, and OpenAPI starts, I think, at version 3. But Swagger, there is a Swagger converter to OpenAPI. So basically, and you've got it, Hamish has got up on screen. So in this case, we can go to the converter for Swagger and pass in.
A bit like this, I believe.
Correct.
Yep.
So that's the page, and you can pass in your Swagger API, the URL for it. So
and that's what. So that's what this is. That's
correct.
What this is doing
So if
here.
you go and look at that location, you'll see it's just a big bunch of JSON. It has to be the kind of JSON version that you're passing through, not just the Swagger page, but usually it says what the link is to the top to that JSON in the Swagger UI. And then you can pass it through to this converter and get a open API version out as JSON.
Nice.
And save that down. So then, as Hamish will show, you can start loading that up into your workspace. And this starts to make things kind of simple. So instead of going through all these pages and figuring out making sure that you cover them all off, you can start to go, actually, I want to bring in this.
This might be a pretty basic one, actually.
Yeah. So
what's a more complicated
maybe
one?
look for a project, a get for a project.
Get for a project.
So something like that.
Project ID or something.
Just projects.
Just projects.
Yeah. See what,
there
there we go. So all of a sudden it starts loading, and you can see how many different versions come through of what can exist in your query string.
So whilst doing that for a one-off, if you're doing one API call, it's not difficult to go through and into that. But when you then bring up this list here, imagine if you, and as you are Todd, you're doing a full integration. If you had to go and set up all of that for every one of these, that's a lot of time spent.
A lot, and especially when you spell them slightly incorrectly. Yeah. I'm not known for my spelling.
And also sometimes I will find that documentation does not necessarily match up correctly, and that happens all the time. I know I'll be guilty of exactly that. But being able to export this directly from the source tells you exactly what it means.
And the really nice thing about this, especially with converter to the OpenAPI, is you can pick up Swagger 1, Swagger 2, and be able to convert them into this and get them into your HTTP callers with ease. And there's a lot of things that use Swagger.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. No, but that's a massive time saver. And I saw them announce that in Bonn, and it was like, that's a really cool idea, but how am I going to use it? And here we go. Here is a perfect use case of how something like that can improve, streamline, standardise.
Makes the FME users' life a little bit easier.
Yeah, and it's all those little things that are progressing to try and do that.
Correct.
Yeah.
When in essence, it kind of helps FME users show other people, like you were talking about, it's not that they don't, but sometimes it's difficult to explain FME's vast capabilities. And so when you can quickly show them those types of details, or just exhibit, here's just a quick way to get into that data. Oh, wow. It could be
exactly. It's really good for showing people within businesses that don't understand the use of FME how all of a sudden it interacts with something they don't see as spatial.
Right.
So,
And I've always said that there's really no difference between tabular data that's sitting in a database and spatial data. It's just that spatial data has an extra couple of fields that says where it is in the world. That's the only difference, and FME doesn't care if you have spatial data or you don't. Something that we didn't really touch on, but I'll just bring up before we finish up, was, well, we sort of loosely touched on it, was around requirements. And Gavin, as you said with that WorkflowMax, your requirements were very narrow. And as the project expanded, all these more requirements came out. So I think that highlights just how important when you're scoping out a project, and I know in your case it wasn't really feasible, and definitely in the case that Todd's dealing with at the moment, we don't really have the time to do all these requirement gatherings, but it shows almost a symptom of your process was that you didn't know how far these requirements were going to go, so you weren't able to set up those transformers in the first instance to make your life easier in the long term. Whereas we've now learned from that, and I'd say even though stuff Todd's doing with ProjectWorks is a lot more rushed, a lot more time critical, they've actually gone to the effort of setting up a lot of those requirements already. So Todd is working to a list of requirements.
I know what we do already, so because I know what we're currently doing, I can go, well actually I need to make sure I build this and we don't want to have the custom code.
And talking about custom transformers, I'm just going to put a shameless plug in here. You might have heard that change has been made to the Hub community of custom transformers, and us here at Abley, we have just recently become verified publishers. So we've got a range of ArcGIS and enterprise focused transformers up there, but we're looking at expanding that and progressively adding them. So jump on the Hub, have a look at the verified. Have a look at the verified publishers, and you should see our name there. So thank you both of you for sharing those experiences. So this was the DE team here at Abley for another FME Fireside with the old face Gavin and Todd and myself, Hamish.
That's right, you're the old face Gavin.
Everyone's been missing you, Gavin.
Oh man, old man.
Oh well, we'll catch you guys next time.